Hello BookTube. I have just finished rereading Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. This is a reread. I originally read it, where else? In school, because everybody reads this book in school, right? Or am I wrong? I think a lot of people get this as assigned reading either in high school or in college. In my case, it was in college. I believe it was junior year of college. I was taking a modern European history course. This was one of the assigned readings for that course. And I went into it eagerly because I know, like every college student knows, that this book was the basis for Apocalypse Now. And I was a huge fan of Apocalypse Now. Now, Apocalypse Now was already an old movie by the time I was at college. It was about 20 years old at that time, not to date myself. But it was still very popular, especially among the film bros, and I was a film bro. Or at least I was film bro adjacent. I desperately wanted to become a film bro. I hung out with film bros. I tried to watch all the right stuff and enthuse about the right movies. And so I had seen Apocalypse Now a few times and believed it was the greatest thing ever. And I knew that this book was the basis for Apocalypse Now. Now, if you know anything about it, you know that Apocalypse Now is a loose adaptation because they changed the setting. Heart of Darkness is based in the Belgian Congo, supposedly, although they never actually say that in the book. It's left ambiguous. We'll come back to that maybe in a little bit. Apocalypse Now took the same basic story format and transported it over to the Vietnam War, but it was the same idea. So I was eager to read this because of the association with Apocalypse Now, and I was expecting it to line up a lot more with Apocalypse Now than it did. I guess I didn't realize how loose an adaptation Apocalypse Now was. I was expecting, I knew that one was based in Africa and one was based in Vietnam, but I was expecting that maybe there would be more of a one-to-one correspondence between all the characters and the scenes, etc. But as I eagerly read through it, I started to get frustrated with how slow the story was moving and how thick the prose was. So it starts off with just a lot of very heavy descriptive passages. And I naively thought, okay, well, this is the beginning. The plot's about to kick in any time now, so if I just kind of read a little bit faster, I'm going to get to the good stuff. But the more I read and the more I tried to plow on through to the good stuff, the more I started to get confused and feel like I wasn't understanding the book. And then, of course, you get to a point halfway through the book where you kind of admit to yourself that you've lost the plot of the book a bit, but because this was assigned reading, I just plowed on and got to the end of it pretty disappointed that the plot that I was expecting to kick in never really kicked in, at least not like I expected it to. So that was my experience reading Heart of Darkness in college. And because of that experience, I've always considered it a book that I had read, but not really read, not properly read, not fully absorbed. So it has been on my list of books to revisit, to come back and reread for ages now. And here I am. I've come back and given it a proper reread. So the plot of the book, I'm going to go ahead and just spoil everything, partly because I want to talk about the various plot points in the book, but also because I think this is one of those books where spoilers aren't really important. This is a book where you are meant to get into the prose and enjoy or appreciate the scene setting that's going on. So the point of the book is not so much the plot as how the story is told. And you can still appreciate how the story is told even if you already know what the story is going to be. So that's my justification for spoiling things. Excuse me. But yeah, the plot, for anyone who's unfamiliar. This book was written during the Scramble for Africa. I believe it was written in the end of the 19th century and published at the very beginning of the 20th century. So Scramble for Africa is, I think, traditionally dated as 1876 to 1914, so right smack in that period. And also smack in the middle of the Belgian Congo. So Belgium is, of course, a little nation on the map of Europe, but because of various historical circumstances, they were hoping to make themselves a considerable power by carving out for themselves a chunk of Africa, the Belgian Congo. And they were also extracting a lot of resources from the Belgian Congo and using the native population to do that in a way that got a lot of human rights campaigners upset. So there were atrocities, they were killing people, they were, I think, cutting off people's hands if they didn't meet the quota, or just doing all this barbaric stuff to frighten or coerce the native population into doing their work for them so that they could extract the necessary materials. It was very brutal, and it outraged civilized opinion at the time. In fact, I've read and reviewed on this channel a book called The Scramble for Africa by Thomas Pakenham, in which, if memory serves, Joseph Conrad is quoted in that book as saying, it's simply amazing what is happening in the Congo. It's as if the moral clock of the world had been set back 100 years, that we are tolerating these outrages that were going on. But of course, to a large extent, they weren't tolerated. I mean, they were happening, but it was just like outrages that are happening today. People were campaigning against it. It was a big thing with the British public raising awareness of what was going on in the Congo, etc. And so that's the background in which Heart of Darkness takes place. The main character is a guy named Morrill. Sorry, let me make sure I'm saying that right. The main character is Marlowe. Marlowe. And he is an Englishman who goes to the European continent to get involved in piloting a steamship. Now, for whatever reason, the book never explicitly says the Belgian Congo. It just says he went to a country and got hired by a company and then went inroad on a river. But the geographic details give enough hints that you can place this as the Belgian Congo. And I think certainly the readers at the time would identify it as the Belgian Congo. As he goes into the Belgian Congo, he keeps hearing stories about this man named Kurtz, who is regarded as this incredible genius, very good at what he does in terms of extracting ivory from the territory he is in control of. But he's also, everyone talks about him as just an all-around genius, a very sensitive man, somebody who paints beautifully, does poetry, knows philosophy, is fascinating to talk to. Everybody is in love with this guy, Kurtz. And yet the company is worried that Kurtz has gone out of control, and they want to go into the Congo to get Kurtz and remove him from his position before he and his methods do any more damage to the company's investment in this area. So yeah, that's the general plot of the book. If you can't tell already, it is an anti-colonialist book, written during the height of colonial abuses in the Belgian Congo, and meant to show that although the white people claim to be on a civilizing mission into Africa, in reality, they were descending into barbarism and savagery in Africa. They were becoming the very barbarism that they said that they were in there to eradicate. There's a great line near the beginning of the book where the main character is in this European country visiting his aunt, and his aunt had helped him get the job with the company. And his aunt is going on and on about what a wonderful company it was and what a civilizing mission they were doing in Africa. And after listening to her babble on, he says he gently reminds his aunt that the company is actually set up for profit. And his aunt just kind of disregards this and said, well, they're set up for profit, but they're still doing good things there. So yeah, it's those kind of lines and critiques really bring home the message of this book. Now, all that being said, there is a great temptation to talk about the politics and the history and the message of the book because, for a number of reasons. One is the book was arguably ahead of its time in terms of the anti-colonialist messages in the book. And in fact, if people in the 20th century had paid more attention to the themes of this book, which were written in the late 19th century, maybe the history of the 20th century would have been different. Or that's another way of saying that this book was not only ahead of its time in the 19th century, arguably it presaged a lot of the moral disasters of the 20th century. And the politics and the history of this is all quite interesting. So that's why there's a temptation to talk about this. But I guess here's the main point I want to make about this book. It's actually not about the politics. I mean, the politics is there. But this is a writer who wants you to linger on his sentences. And maybe an obvious point of comparison is George Orwell. So Orwell wrote a lot of political stuff. And when Orwell wrote something political, Orwell wanted you to focus on his political message. And he wrote in a very direct way. Joseph Conrad is not doing it. And, he could have done it, right? Presumably he had some range as an author. He could have been more direct if he had wanted to. But he doesn't want to. I definitely got the sense in this book that the politics and the message are taking the back seat. And what his focus is on is just writing his very stylistic sentences. Now, because this was a reread, I knew a little bit better what I was getting into this time. And I took my time with this book. I tried very hard not to get into a hurry to get to the good stuff and just linger over the sentences and let them wash over me and appreciate it and kind of read it slowly. And if you do that, it is readable. I mean, the prose is a little bit thick, but it's not opaque. It's not like any of the modernist writers or something like that. It does yield itself if you kind of engage with it. But if you are like I was when I was 20 years old, you're like, okay, I just want to get to the good stuff. Get through all these boring descriptions. When is the meeting with Kurt's going to happen? If you do that, you're just going to get lost in this book. So take it slow, enjoy the sentences, kind of let them ferment in your mind a little bit and kind of sound them out as you're reading maybe, and appreciate the beauty of the prose that he's trying to do here. The other thing that he's trying to do, in addition to create his ornate prose style, is he's trying to create mental pictures in your mind. In a way that I guess modern books don't do as much. I had a friend, I've mentioned this a few times on this channel before, but I had a friend who was studying 20th century literature. And she was telling me that there is noticeable changes in how literary descriptions changed after the age of cinema. Before the age of cinema, the literary descriptions were much more detailed for, I guess, a couple of reasons. One is after cinema, the writers just kind of assumed that the readers had mental pictures in their minds. So the writers didn't have to do as much work to create these. They just kind of did a few brief words to sketch the scene, and the readers could picture it in their minds a lot more. I can imagine something like this, which takes place in the jungles of Africa. Nowadays, of course, jungles of Africa, you can picture it immediately, right? You've seen movies. You know what these jungles look like. But in 1900, could the reader be relied upon to call upon those mental images quite as quickly? Or does the author have to create them? I think this is an author who is spending a lot of time trying to create very precise mental images in your head. And then I think the other thing as well is, maybe before cinema and before television, people just had more attention spans and were more willing to engage with these long literary descriptions. I don't know. But regardless, this is a book that has long literary descriptions. Now, again, if you're in a hurry to get through this, you're going to hate it. But if you take the time to engage with it, which I did this time around, then it can be quite wonderful. So they're on this steamship going upriver, and he talks about the primeval forest on the sides of them. He talks about navigating the river and trying to find where the channels are. He talks about the sounds of the river. There's one passage where the river is completely covered by fog, and so it's impossible for them to go anywhere, but they're hearing these disconcerting sounds somewhere in the jungle, like these agonized cries, and the white men on the boat are standing nervously with their guns, and they want him to, the narrator of the story is the captain. They want him to keep going forward, and he says, we can't go forward. I'm watching this fog like a cat watches a mouse, but until it lifts, we can't do anything. And I don't know, it's just a great scene where I was picturing perfectly in my head this foggy river in the middle of this primeval forest where they're hearing all these strange sounds, but they're just trapped in this fog on the river. And there are a few, more than a few maybe, scenes like this in the jungle. Joseph Conrad had visited the Belgium Congo before writing this book. Not that it's necessarily strictly accurate. He had a reputation for mixing in his own ideas and his romanticism. But I guess he had a foundation to play on. He talks about, the light of the full moon on nights sparkling off the river, or in the jungle canopy, and You just really get caught in with these visual images if you let yourself. Now, what drove me crazy about this book, both when I read it when I was 20, and to a large extent when I reread it now, even though I should know better, is Kurtz is being built up so much. And there's kind of two parallel narrations going on. So the whole story it's one of those books where it's a story within a story. So it's a group of men waiting on this ship in England for the tide to be right for them to sail away. One of the men, Marlowe, starts telling his story, and the other men are listening to the story. So Marlowe is acting as the narrator, kind of, I went here, he said this to me, I saw this. But he will also, as a narrator, kind of pull back and give foreshadow or anticipate stuff that was going to happen. Like, little did I know then how much this decision was to affect, or something like that, right? So, both from Marlowe's foreshadowing narration, in which he talks about how wonderful a man Kurtz was and how much Kurtz would affect his mind and stuff like that. And this is all before, in the story, he's met Kurtz. But he's foreshadowing this by constantly talking about how great Kurtz is. And all the other characters in the story, inside of Marlowe's story, are constantly talking about how great Kurtz is. So it's building up and up and up that when we meet Kurtz, all these questions are going to be answered. We're going to find out why he was such a great man, why he captivated everyone, what he was doing out in the jungle that was so wonderful. And it builds up and up and up, but then we never really meet Kurtz. So the reader doesn't. We find him and he's on his deathbed and he says or does very little in the book. But yeah, as we're getting... So the steamboat arrives at the place where Kurtz is. We see Kurtz's home. We see Kurtz's... The narrator is able to see Kurtz's sickbed off in the distance. And I'm like, okay, here we go. We're going to meet Kurtz now. I'm going to find out what the heart of this book, so to speak, is really all about. And then the narration just pauses to describe a woman who is, I guess, Kurtz's mistress, walking across the field. And this is another place where Conrad is trying to paint a picture in your mind. And he does it fairly well. He talks about her walking majestically like a queen, the river in the background, the moon up ahead. She pauses, she looks, she makes eye contact, she sways a bit. It just goes on like that for a couple pages, a few paragraphs. And, as much as you're getting the beauty of this scene with this woman just kind of walking across this silent, beautiful area with everything framed so perfectly, you're like, okay, Conrad is playing with us now, surely, right? He knows that we just want to get on with the action. And he's like, no. I know Kurtz is there, but you're not going to get to see him just yet. We are going to pause and watch this woman walk across the field for a page. And it gets a little bit silly at times, just how the book keeps delaying the climax just to have all these lingering scenes of something slowly happening with a lot of description. And then Kurtz dies, and we never really get any big exchange with him after all that build-up. And, I mean, to a certain extent, maybe that was the only way you could do it. I mean, after all that build-up, in anything that Kurtz was bound to be a disappointment. either way, right? Like, unless Conrad was the most amazing author ever, he couldn't possibly have created a Kurtz which would have wowed his readers as much as the other characters in the novel seem to have been wowed by him. So it's something that maybe just has to be left to the imagination, how charismatic Kurtz was or how deep and philosophical Kurtz was. But it's something that, as a reader, even the second time around, I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's it. I was really thinking this was going to build up to more. Excuse me. The message of the book, and again, I do believe that the message is taking a back seat to the descriptions and just kind of the ornate prose. But the message of the book is how a wonderful, sensitive, philosophical man like Kurtz could have, out into Africa, descended into such savagery because of the mechanisms of the colonial apparatus that he himself was a part of. That he just got too into his job and ended up becoming barbaric and killing the natives and having the natives' heads stuck up around his camp and stuff like that. Now, I'm nearing the end of my time limit. The camera I have has a 30-minute time limit here. But I should note that I think there's considerable discussion whether this is a progressive or an anti-progressive book. It's progressive in the sense it's anti-colonialist. It's been criticized in the sense that it portrays a very negative view of Africa. So Africa is everything dark and soulless and savage, or not. You could argue that Conrad's portrayal of the Africans is sympathetic and it's the Europeans who are savage. We could get into a lot of discussion about the portrayal in this book, but smarter people than I have argued about it, so I think I'm largely going to sidestep this one and go on to the ending. And the ending is brilliant, I think, despite my complaints about how anticlimactic the meeting with Kurtz is. But Kurtz, by the time they get to him, is dying. So they take him on the steamboat to go back. He doesn't want to go back. He tries to escape. He wants to stay in this little kingdom he's built out there. But he's taken back against his will. He's largely too weak to resist at this point. And as he's dying, his last words, or close to his last words, are looking out and saying, the horror, the horror. And according to the publisher's introduction in this book, what he's talking about here when he says the horror is I guess the horror within men's souls, or the horror of how he had devolved into this savagery that he himself found so horrific. Just a horror of what he himself had done, or what human beings, namely himself, are capable of. So the narrator Marlowe goes back to Europe and meets up with Kurtz's fiancée. And they're talking to each other, and they're both talking about their love of Kurtz and what a wonderful person he was. The narrator Marlowe apparently had more conversations with Kurtz than are recorded in his story. There must have been some off-screen conversations with Kurtz, so to speak. But in the course of their conversation, the fiancé says to him, "Tell me what his last words are. I really want to know." He's got this moment where, do I tell her the last words were the horror, the horror? And he thinks about it. And he wants to say to her, don't you know what her last words were? Isn't it obvious? Can't you hear it in the silence all around us? The horror, the horror. But he can't bring himself to say that. So he said his last words were your name. And she said, oh, I knew it. I knew it. I just wanted to hear you say it. I knew that what his last words would be. And that's where the book ends. And I thought, oh, Now that is an ending. I mean, way to go out on a punch there. Okay, I'm out of time here, so that's all I have time for.